Feisty, combative, defensive. The last ever press conference by Victoria's 48th Premier was vintage Dan Andrews.
Look, I am worse than a workaholic. I'd spend every waking moment is about the work, and there's only so long you can do that for.
He said he'd recently begun thinking about life after politics, especially for the 3 kids whose lives have been dominated by their dad's job.
Ultimately, once those thoughts of what life will be like after this role start to creep in, you've got a really important choice to make. You either kind of push on and ultimately, I think, potentially resent the job, and you just never want to do that.
The journos wanted to know why at the 2022 election he said he would serve the full 4-year term. Andrews couldn't hide his scorn.
So you've got the one about, I said I'd stay and now I'm not. Yeah, and it was true then, and I've changed my mind. I hope that you have a sense that when it's time, it's time. And I don't think, look, I'll just put it this way perhaps. Doing this job requires a lot of hard work. It's not a complaint, it's just the nature of it. If you're going to do it properly. If you're going to do it to the best of your ability. And it requires a lot, not just of the person whose name's on the door, it requires a lot of the people that you love.
Daniel Andrews is the most formidable political leader of his generation. He has established himself as the most powerful politician, either federal or state, over the last 3 or 4 years. So the significance of today's events will reshape not only Victorian politics, but Australian politics.
Damon Johnston is the Victoria editor of The Australian.
Being the Premier of Victoria is a massive job. He's loved it. He is an innately political human being. He loves politics. He loves the cut and thrust, the ruthless nature of it. But it is exhausting.
Perhaps you've not ever really understood this about me. Like, I've never complained about the fact that we had to deal with fire and flood and a 1 in 100 year pandemic. That's the job. The job is dealing with all comers and all issues. And it's not an easy job. If it was easy, it would be nowhere near as important as it is.
When he was re-elected for a 3rd time in November 2022, it was always a case of how long will he hang around for. All I would say is that to go just days before the grand final is probably a little sooner than most people expected, but he's been a big part of politics since being elected in 2002, and I think his legacy will continue to be felt. The profound nature of his leadership will survive for better and worse long after he has left Parliament at 5 p.m. on Wednesday.
Legacy is for other people to determine. As I said, I could have stood up here and done a big long laundry list of things. That's for you guys to work out, for others to work out. I haven't done it for those. I'm not in this for those reasons. Others, and that's what leadership's about. Leadership is about subjecting yourself to the judgment, the almost continuous judgment of others.
Andrew's successor will be chosen at a caucus meeting at lunchtime today. His widely acknowledged heir apparent is Deputy Premier Jacinta Allen, the current Transport Infrastructure Minister. She first became a minister in Steve Brax's government at the age of just 29 and is a leading light in Andrews' faction, the Socialist Left.
Jacinta Allen is the first among equals in the succession of the Victorian Labor Party. There's one problem for Jacinta Allen, though, is she's not particularly popular amongst her Labor colleagues. The issue will be, is there enough rancour to unsettle the factional deal that may well have been put in place? I'm not sure there is. There also may well not be enough time. He has said he'll see the Governor at 5 p.m. on Wednesday and tender his resignation as both Premier and the member for Mulgrave. Now, that doesn't leave any rivals, and there are some rivals, much time to get votes in caucus.
Dan Andrews was just 38 years old when he was elected Premier for the first time in December of 2014. Successive wins in 2018 and 2022 have made him the nation's longest-serving Premier and cemented his faction, the Socialist Left, as the dominant force in Victorian Labor.
We will govern for all Victorians. no matter how you voted, no matter what your views or opinions. That's what our job is. We take our responsibility seriously because Labor does what matters.
When he surpassed 3,000 days in the job earlier this year, he officially qualified for a bronze statue to be erected in his honour. Dan Andrews never spent a day on the backbench, and he's clocked up a number of big wins in his time. His government drove compensation reform for victim survivors of institutional child sexual abuse and a treaty with First Nations people. He oversaw the legislation of voluntary assisted dying in Victoria, an Australian first, and implemented rental law reforms designed to give tenants a leg up in an increasingly challenging market. Andrews nominated his own best moment and couldn't resist a little dig at journalists.
Best experiences? None of you were there. It happened Thursday afternoon when I got on the test train at Metro Tunnel with no media, and I went from Arden and I travelled underneath the city at 80 kilometres an hour on a train that was made right here in Victoria. And it's not readily apparent because it's not like a building that springs up out of the ground, it's literally underground. And when the Victorians get to see what I saw on Thursday, I think they'll be very, very impressed.
But Andrews' tenure has been rich with dramas and scandals too. In 2018, he controversially inked a $1.5 trillion deal with Beijing to build major infrastructure across Victoria without the approval of the federal government.
It is a matter of public record that the government's policy has been not to sign up to the Belt and Road Initiative. Never have, never will, Mr Speaker.
The so-called Belt and Road Initiative crumbled following federal intervention just 3 years later. He disappeared from public life in 2021 after falling down some slippery steps at a holiday home, suffering 6 broken ribs and serious spinal injuries that put him off work for months during the COVID-19 pandemic. That sparked a wave of lingering conspiracy theories, as did a 2013 car accident where a teen cyclist was seriously injured. More recently, he's been caught up in allegations of branch stacking after the Australian revealed one of the officers of his closest factional allies had fraudulently extended the memberships of dead people. There's the sensational cancellation of the 2026 Commonwealth Games too. Andrews said he couldn't in good conscience divert billions of taxpayer dollars away from hospitals and schools to cover the ballooning cost of hosting the sporting event. And the decisions that will have the longest reaching impact, how Andrews handled COVID-19.
You won't be able to go to the pub because the pub is shut. That doesn't mean you can have all your mates round to home and get on the beers. That's not appropriate.
It was the pandemic that really took Andrews onto a national stage. You'll recall the 100-odd press conferences in a row. Their main purpose was to help him survive this crisis in a political sense. He needed to be seen to be the action man, the man who was going to fix this mess. And he was proven correct. He was re-elected 2 years later. But his management of the pandemic was disastrous. But of course, while others lost their jobs, the health minister and his chief bureaucrat in the fallout from that disaster, when it came to his own political skin, resigning would have been, as he described it, a case of cutting and running. Victoria needed him to repair the damage that his government had wrought. Underpinning everything is politics and power. He is the most political politician in Australia. Everything is about what the public are thinking, blended with his instinct and his own skill to harness that. So everything he does has a political focus.
That's the Australian's Victoria editor, Damon Johnston. He's talking about Daniel Andrews, who resigned as the state's Premier yesterday.
Like most politicians, he's there for the power and, having achieved that power, to keep it for as long as he can. He is ruthless when it comes to his colleagues within the Labor Party. The ruthless manner in which he deals with the Labor Party kind of speaks to his real character. That's not to say he hasn't been a successful leader. He has been. History will show that he is one of the most formidable politicians of our time. He's also perfected that unique ability to ride through a crisis probably better than any other federal or state politician in the last 25 years. The bigger the crisis, the calmer he becomes. He's also a very good communicator. He's not a details guy when it comes to money. And for that reason, his legacy will have a asterisk next to it, I think.
Andrews leaves Victorian Labor with 3 years to prepare for the 2026 election and a whopping majority. 56 seats in the 88-seat parliament.
There's an old saying in politics, go when they're asking you to stay. It's really important. It's really important. In terms of who will be the next Premier, well, the next Premier will be determined by the caucus and or the membership of our party.
Opposition leader John Pessetto is struggling even within his own party.
Thank you very much. Order. Order.
That was about Pessetto's attempt to throw out a frontbencher, Moira Deeming, whom he accused of transphobia. The question now is if the opposition should also be looking for new leadership.
One of the points that's not recognised enough in analysing the reign of Daniel Andrews and why he's been so successful is the fact that he's been up against a shambles of a Liberal Party now for pretty much his entire 13 years as Labor leader. And since he became Premier in 2014, the Liberal Party just hasn't got itself together. It's been riven with factionalism. It's had poor policy work. It's had poor candidates. The Liberal Party do need to unite. It's too early to say if Pessetto is that man. It's too early to say he's not. He's certainly got some internal issues of his own making. But clearly the Liberal Party was never going to beat Daniel Andrews. Andrews is gone, and they'll be hoping that they can beat Jacinta Allen or whoever takes over.